Well, welcome. It's Black History Conversations. Welcome to you all. This week we're welcoming especially Nigerian author Dr. Bunmi Oyinsan. She's the founder and presenter of Sankofa Pan African series. So we're going to hear more about that and hear about some of the very interesting topics she's been discussing recently. And we're also going to have an update from the Windrush Allies Network, and we've got colleagues joined us today. So that's great. Um, because I'm in Australia, it means my screen share stopped working. Well, that's really interesting. So I'll just say that I respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which I'm currently living. And I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future, because this is the sovereign land of the first Australians. It was never ceded, and we are working, I'll add this to my usual acknowledgement, but we're working towards the government giving the First Nations people a voice in Parliament. This is a real progress, so one step along the line at a time, but real respect for that. Let me just see what's happened to my PowerPoint. Don't know what's gone wrong there. Oops, a daisy, one more. Oh, right, back we go. Right, let me just, apologies for this. Right, come out of that again. And, all right, no, it's just sulking at the moment, so that's that. Okay then, so Bunmi, it's a great honour for you to be with us, joining us from Canada. I'm talking about being here in Australia, and Black history in Canada is fascinating, but that's not the subject that you're going to be talking with us today. Tell us about the sessions that you've been working on since Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II passed. I know there's been so much conversation and so much dialogue about just the appropriateness of the British monarchy now. So I'm just going to say over to you, Bunmi, and I know you're going to show us one of your recordings.
Thank you very much for having me. And then following in your footsteps, I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that Canada, the country in which I live, belongs to the First Nation, is the ancestral home of the First Nations. And I actually acknowledge, the fact that it wasn't something that they've given out willingly, and I continue to support them in every way I can, so that at least some of the wrong done, will be righted. They do have some kind of a voice here, but it's not nearly enough for the people who actually are the original owners of this vast and wealthy country that we live in. Yeah, so yes, the Sankofa Pan African series, as I actually started during the lockdown when I was just looking for something to keep busy and not go insane. And my husband happens to be a retired filmmaker, and so we have a small studio in our business, and so that's how we kept busy during the lockdown. And then to our surprise, it's kind of gained a lot of traction. And as a matter of fact, we also even have a spin-off from there now, because people kept asking for materials, history, in formats that children can also enjoy. And so we started the sankofastorybooks.com. It's a website where we talk about history, biographies of great Africans and Africans in the diaspora. We have some historical comics, Afrocentric nursery rhymes, using Afro beats and things like that. So it's also something that we're happy that a lot of children are using. So since the Queen died, I've just found myself as as an African, from a country that used to be an ex-colony, amazed by the way in which somehow the monarchy is being packaged as being different, being innocent of slavery and colonization that have resulted in, the kind of mess most of our countries in Africa and the Caribbean are in. And I think the one that actually triggered me was when I heard about the declaration that Kenya had declared 4 days of mourning, for the Queen. I was like, is there some kind of do we have some kind of mass psychosis going on there? And so that was the first one I did, and then I think I did one about trying to also accept, okay, the Queen is dead. She did not accept the rule of the monarchy. She never admitted the rule of the monarchy in slavery and colonization. But Charles, who's been making some pronouncements about expressing some regrets about the past history, I did want to kind of challenge him to, come all out and actually be seen to be championing reparation. And that's the only way we'll consider his regrets to be sincere, as far as I'm concerned. And I think the third one I did was when I came across this thing called the deliberate effort by the colonial offices when they were leaving countries in Africa and other colonized parts of the world, the deliberate effort they made to hide files and destroy files, so that these kind of claims that we're trying to make about reparations and things like that would be difficult. They actually instructed that only colonial officers who were British, white British, could take part in deciding which files were left in Africa and which ones were destroyed and which ones were carted, back to Europe. And it just shows that none of the kind of situations that African countries found themselves after independence, none of it was an accident. It just showed, for me, it highlighted how deliberate the effort was, to keep us blinded and, to kind of, yes, make us forget some of the things that were done to us, which I think in tying it, to the way in which you actually I saw TV footages of people weeping, in mourning for the Queen. It wasn't just the president of Kenya now declaring 4 days of her holiday to mourn her. There were even countries who had never been colonized by Britain, like Rwanda, also joining in the morning. And it just goes to show how our leaders, our political leaders, a lot of them have an acute lack of knowledge of history, which is why it's nice when you hear the people like the lady in is it Bermuda or Barbados? Mali, when she is, she's one of those very rare leaders, in a post-colonial country who has a good grasp of history and who brings it to bear, when she's talking, when she's challenging, the present global economic infrastructure, which continues, to keep a lot of our countries impoverished. So I'll just show you
while you're just putting that on, Bunmi, thank you so
yeah.
much for what you said so far. Your presentations are fascinating, and you often come up with, 3 or 4 a week on some different aspect or other, or maybe you'll pull something
not anymore. When I first started, like
right.
during the COVID, I had more time to.
All right.
During
yes.
the lockdown, I had more time. But now I'm struggling to come up with one new video every week, which is what I've been doing for the past so many months. One every Sunday. I have a new video out every Sunday. So other days we've just been recycling some of the ones that we've shown. Because I have no finance, I have no funding. Yeah. I'm doing everything by myself, and I still have to make time, you know, to run the school in Nigeria and all of that. Yeah.
Your achievements have been nothing less than remarkable. So we're just going to have a look at why are Africans mourning Queen Elizabeth.
Okay,
and this
let me just,
you put out in September, wasn't it? Just
yes. Can you see it and hear it clearly?
Yes, we can. It's fine. Okay. I can't hear it though.
Oh, really? You probably need to your volume. You can't hear it?
No, it's not.
What about now?
Has the death
Can you hear it now?
The second ignited some kind of mass psychosis in Africa?
I can hear it. Okay.
Is there a level of psychosis involved when Black people mourn her so unreservedly? Welcome to the Sankofa Pan African series. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series. Subscribe button so you know. Seriously though, we need to ask ourselves this question. What does the monarchy represent for us as people of African descent?
Oh no.
I'm actually really excited about this.
I'm particularly stumped by the announcement made by the immediate past president of Kenya, who declared 4 days of national mourning for the British monarch. It is one thing to commiserate with the royal family over the death of their loved one, but to see Africans and other oppressed people grieving so publicly is mourning gone awry. In order to be able to actually see Elizabeth II as someone worthy of mourning by people of African descent and others who suffered under the British Empire, we have to believe that she was not only innocent, but also completely ignorant of what her family did that led to her becoming an empress. So is it really possible for someone who was the custodian of the British crown and who embraced her role as empress so wholeheartedly to be completely oblivious of the various crimes against humanity that were carried out in her name? While the idea that countries like Kenya and Malawi, and even some like Rwanda that were never colonized by the British, have declared days of mourning is alarming. But Kenya's case is almost terrifyingly so. Uhuru Kenyatta's father was imprisoned on the accusation of being a mastermind behind the Mau Mau movement. His name, Uhuru, the given name of the president who declared the 4 days of mourning, actually means freedom or independence. So does Uhuru Kenyatta not remember what the British under Elizabeth II did to Kenyans? Well, here are a few of the crimes against humanity committed by the British against the people of Kenya during her reign. One, which Uhuru Kenyatta should never forget, is the level of attrition committed against the Mau Mau movement. When the British detained about 1.5 million Kenyans in concentration camps for the simple reason that they were demanding independence. Kenyans were detained, starved, made to perform forced labor, and tortured. Britain tried to force the detainees to renounce their allegiance to the Mau Mau movement by making them pledge allegiance to Britain and the Queen, this same Elizabeth II. And on the 3rd of March, 1959, during Elizabeth II's reign in Holla, one of the concentration camps that were set up to torture the Mau Mau, 11 of the detainees were clubbed to death by guards under the order of the camp commandant, a loyal subject of Her Majesty Elizabeth II. 77 other surviving detainees sustained serious permanent injuries. The British then tried to cover this massacre by lying that the deaths occurred after the men drank contaminated water. As a matter of fact, anyone who is even remotely familiar with the British colonial system will recall that the Queen's portrait was plastered over every government office, court, or what have you. Her image and name were used to legitimize colonial force, which extracted resources that built the UK and left colonies in Africa, the Caribbean, and other parts of the world impoverished. We are still suffering as a result of that pillage. So, how ignorant could Elizabeth II have been of the inhumane acts being committed in her name, especially given the British tradition, which mandates the prime ministers who run the government in her name to brief her regularly? I think the briefing is actually on a weekly basis or monthly, I'm not sure now. But they are mandated to brief her regularly. Now, some may argue that maybe the prime ministers might have tried to keep her in the dark, but she was not illiterate by any stretch of the imagination. There were all kinds of records that she could have called for. There were also newspapers. To be fair, it is possible to become so myopic in the face of the monarchy's propaganda machinery to lead people to believe that she and her family were especially chosen by God to enjoy the privileges to which they were born. And it is a huge and effective propaganda machinery that they use. It is just as easily possible for religious Africans, and we know there are lots of us. So it is possible for religious Africans to believe that indeed it was God who ordained the royal family to enjoy such privileges at the expense of other human beings. However, to quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people.
Throw away your old pillow right now, because what you're about to hear in this video may prevent serious.
Charles III and the rest of the British royal family now have a chance to speak up in ways that their matriarch and other ancestors did not. They need to renounce their title as heads of state of countries where their ancestors had enslaved and then colonized people. They shouldn't wait for people to say they don't want them anymore. They should have the grace to renounce any title or hold that they have over such countries. People who call themselves leaders of countries that suffered under the yoke of slavery slave trade and colonization, also need to wake up and free themselves mentally. It is the only way forward. We cannot progress without facing up to our history, so that we do not continue to remain such easy prey to neocolonialization in all its forms. If the British want to continue their blind loyalty to their monarchy, that is their business. They are welcome to it. But just as other European countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium, and so many others, which have chosen to keep their monarchs as figureheads, the United Kingdom should stop foisting their royal family on the rest of the world. Enough is enough. Please remember, Elizabeth II's funeral alone is being estimated to cost between $7.5 and $9 billion. Here is how her country made the kind of wealth that would allow them give her such an extravagant funeral. At the time of our accession, Britain's economy was wrecked as a result of the Second World War. The British government then decided to build its economy using a policy that was called the Imperial Resurgence. Kenya's tea, alongside other resources from Africa and other parts of the world that were colonized by Britain, too numerous to name here, was what was used to bolster the British economy. As such, when we watch and see all the pomp and pageantry with all the imperial emblems that will be on display during the funeral, just as during every other major royal event, remember that it is the blood, oil, and sweat of Africans and other colonized people that has been translated into the stupendous cost of maintaining the royal family. Let's not deceive ourselves. Thanks for watching. Please support us through Patreon and by buying me coffee so we can continue to bring you this series.
Fantastic. This is about the third time I've watched it. It's really, really, you just pulled the points all together. And welcome to Tolu. It's great that you've been able to join us too. Okay, so I think we'll pass over to others to comment, and then Bunmi, you can come back on some of those points. All right, Garrick, do you want to come in on a point?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. First time I've had the opportunity to actually see the presentation, having heard about the various videos you've done. I think it was well worth attending this session. Just a couple of things. I also lived in Canada for a number of years. I lived in Toronto. My brother's in Ajax. My mom is still in Scarborough.
Oh, wow. I used to live in Scarborough.
Yes. So I'm very familiar with the city and its surrounding. Just in relation to what you've presented, it is true that many of us don't really know our history. We don't know the British history in relation to the former Commonwealth, because most of us who were educated in our own country, we were educated with the British curriculum. And so everything that was taught to us was British. It's only in many later years, many of us, started to sort of explore a little bit further about our history, and we started to discover that a lot of things that we were taught were just lies, just basic lies. There's a song, a reggae song that says Christopher Columbus is a damn blasted liar. Yes, because he never discovered Jamaica. Jamaica was always there by its native people. You can't discover a place that was there, you see? So these are the reality. But just coming back to some of the points that you raised, myself and Roland, we are members of Global African Congress. It's a Pan-African movement. We have discussed the Mama people and his situation, a number of issues relating to Kenya and to other African countries we have discussed. And as you know, that's a reparation organization. And there is a massive reparation movement across the world around these issues. But there was a couple of specific points that you raised in your presentation in relation to the British destroying documentation. And that in itself bring me back to the Windrush, with the destruction of evidence and landing cards and things that, we don't know who you are, so you have to prove yourself because we don't know, which again is a lie because, they do know. And it would appear that, what people don't fully appreciate, that the colonial powers, the imperial powers that have massed together, and it's not just Europe, not just Britain, but if we look across the whole of Europe, how the wealth of Europe came about, people know, but they don't really want to accept it and acknowledge it, but they do know, see? And I think one of the difficult conversation for the current king in relation to Commonwealth countries, although he has made some statements and regrets over what's been done. The reality is making statements without addressing the issue that is not a solution.
No.
And so, this point, Barbados have stood up and declared themselves to, as a republic. And they're across the Caribbean, those conversations are now taking place. But the issue, I think, that is the heart of the conversation is about the massive wealth that's been accumulated from these powers. We all know that, it's a difficult conversation to have around, okay, we accept we've done wrong, yes, but how are we going to put the wrong right? This is the bigger conversation to be had.
Yes.
And this is part of the global conversation about reparation. In America, they've made calculation around reparation. They have difficulty as to who the reparation should be paid to, and even the amount. So those conversations are happening as we speak. But in relation to Britain and the royal powers, we thought that the marriage between Meghan and Harry would be a start of the crown started to have better conversation internally about these matters. Well, far from it, as we've seen. we've now seen, the total moving away from that. So these conversations, and I think you raised a couple of points that we need to consider from a Black perspective. And the first one is about, us having knowledge and understanding about our history. So that comes back to Black history. And these conversations that we're having is about Black history conversation. That's the first thing. The second thing, and it's important that Black history conversation, it's not just for Black people.
Yes.
And we've made this point several times. Unless we start to engage with the wider society and communities, Black conversation is not really going to make a big impact and changes. And I've said this before in various platforms. When we talk about Black history, we're talking about global world history, African history, British history, European history. We're talking about the much bigger conversation. And we need to bring all that to bear in those conversations for the wider audience, and do not restrict it for just a small group of people who have no real power to influence change. So we need to push it to the places where changes can be made. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm so excited to hear about the work you're doing on other platforms. Incidentally, I am organizing this a virtual conference on Monday. And the title is, what does it mean to be a global African in the 21st century? And the idea for that came from this realization, because I really believe, that we need to more and more connect those issues we're having at our community levels, at our country levels, with the global. For me, that is what encapsulates being a global African, a citizen, a global African citizen. It's beyond borders now, and one of the things that I also find a little bit worrying, maybe not so much in the Caribbean and in Europe and North America, because of the day-to-day ways in which we have to contend with racism. But there is an acute lack of awareness of the role in which race has played in the way in which the world today is economically structured in most of Africa. You'll be amazed that even our most powerful politicians don't stop to think about how decisions being taken, in a WTO, IMF, and things like that, how they affect us and how they should position themselves, not as the kind of beggars that the world sees us as, but as people who have been wronged, and that the wrong has to be made right, like you said, not by us. It's not something we can do alone. It should be a global movement. What stops race from crossing borders? Racism from crossing borders. It's one of the questions I'm hoping we'll be able to raise at the conference. Because I worry, Nigeria is going through some kind of political season right now, and the conversations are just so worrying. One of the people I actually invited to the conference is a very well-known writer who has been at the forefront of entrenching democracy in Nigeria. And his response to me was, oh, thank you very much for organizing this conference, because as someone who has been handicapped by even just trying to survive in his own country, he realizes
that he's lost sight, of the global implications, of the way it's being of globalization, neoliberalization, and how the transnationals are just, entrenching poverty in Africa, the Caribbean, and other parts of the developing world. So I'm really excited to hear about the work you're doing. And I'm also hoping if you find time, you'll be able to join us on Monday.
All right, so I've just got the slide up there. Oops, a
Thank
daisy.
you.
Managed to go backwards. I've just got the slide up there with the link. So you go to Sankofa Pan African series.net, and then it's really easy to see then how you can sign in, and it gives you more information, doesn't it, as well?
Thank you.
So,
Thank
and
you.
welcome to Marcia, who's joined us just. So yeah, so thanks very much for highlighting that, and we'll see if we can get some more folks to come along and join that. These are such important discussions. Garrick, thank you for your contribution. Simon, I don't know if you've got anything you wanted to come in on.
No, I just want to say thank you. It is interesting, some of the discussion. I'm doing some work with Nottingham Trent University, and I had a very, very good meeting about discussing reparations and so on in the context of some of the work that we're doing. And we thought of using our current subject is Jacob Wainwright, who was a formerly enslaved African who was one of David Livingstone's companions, and whether he might make a good case study for looking at reparations. But we also talked about the fact that many of the countries who might benefit from reparations are also the same countries who will be making claims for loss and damage in relation to climate change, and particularly to economic losses from colonialism. So many African countries will have seen no growth in wealth during the entire colonial era. So that there are ways, but at the same time, these are countries now, if you take West Africa, there's more and more information showing how the pattern of rainfall is going to leave many coastal areas, which are breadbaskets for their countries, bereft of rain. That rain is going to be falling in the Atlantic. So I'm hoping that we'll have some, we had about 20 students come in. So I'm trying to refine questions, hoping that maybe 5 or 6 of them will produce a piece of work for us around these subjects, because I think that there's a strong case, but also because many of them are Africans.
And the Caribbean,
it would be such
too.
A healing moment. And the Caribbean, but it
It's
would
been
be such a
predicted that
healing
some
moment.
islands will disappear.
Absolutely, and in the Pacific as well. Places like the Andaman Islands in the Indian Ocean. These are such vulnerable areas. But accepting the need for reparations would be such a healing moment.
I know.
For the world.
I know. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And when you talk to some of these young people and you see it on their faces when the subject is raised, you see how it would free us to move forward instead of always looking backwards. And on that sense, on the monarchy, and I think we often forget to talk about it, but monarchies like the British monarchy started in theft. They stole from their own people. The Normans stole the land from the indigenous people who were here. And yet these are the same people now who say, oh no, you can't criticize the monarchy, you have to. And again, it binds us so much to not just, accepting or even enjoying stories of the past, but living in the past. And yeah, so it was really, really interesting to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Simon, because one of the issues you raised just now about the fact that reparations is also about us being able to move forward and healing is one of the things I'm actually building into my presentation on Monday. I actually also believe that until Africans own their part in slavery, apologize, and find ways to make amends, we cannot make progress. It is part of our history, and the fact that some of our traditional leaders colluded
with the enslavers.
Mhm.
So I know Africa, we don't have money, but simply even acknowledging our role in it, apologizing, and then opening our borders to those who want to return. You know, if we need to reckon.
Yeah. Have
You
you
know,
been, Bunmi? Have
Yeah.
you been, Bunmi, to the Porte du Retour in Benin?
So the what store?
It's the door of return in
The
Benin.
door of
So-
return. No, I haven't been.
Oh, it's a fantastic. As many people as possible should go there, because that is
Yeah.
exactly the kind of monument. It is there. It says, "We are sorry for our part in this," because Dahomey was
Yeah.
part of the slave trade.
Yeah.
We welcome back anybody from, particularly it's Haiti and the United States. We welcome back anybody who was taken from these shores. So it's a very, very important place.
A few countries
Yeah.
are doing it. I know Ghana and maybe even Sierra Leone are offering, visas and things like that. But it should go beyond that. Every country where slaves were taken from Africa must do that. And it should not be done as a favor. It should be as an act of contrition, you know, and because honestly, I believe, look, okay, this plaque you just mentioned in Benin, how many kids are being taught that in school? In Africa, how many kids know actually, you know, that some of our ancestors colluded with those who took our kit and kin away?
Yeah.
So much so that even in our politics now, there's that lack of knowledge is not even allowing us to see how we got to where we are. You know, the economic, political mess we're in Africa. We're not able to see it because we're not connecting what we did during slavery, colonization, to what our political leaders are doing now by allowing transnationals to run amok. You know, we need to make those connections.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Garrick, I know you've got your hand up, but can I ask Marcia first?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Liz. Thank you very much, Bunmi. I'm just going to pose this, not just the need for an apology, but really the need for all African countries to unite and become one big country instead of this continent of countries. That's the way forward. I mean, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I think for Africa. And so I think maybe that needs to be put in the mission statement that of the conference that you're doing on Monday. Africa needs to unite and be one big country. That's what I think, but I could be wrong. What do I know?
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea.
Together, Marcia, and became one big country, and look what's happened now. Oh dear,
Yeah,
right. Simon's got to sum up.
It's a brilliant idea, but it's actually, Africa is more complicated than that. There are actually some African countries that have more, who are happier to connect more with the Middle East than with being Africans, you know. Most of Northern Africa, in fact, a lot of them don't even accept that they are Negroid, you know, and to some extent they are right, because there's been all kinds of waves of migration, you know, and so that populations have become very diluted, you know, but so there are all kinds of allegiances, you know, that make it difficult for Africa to operate as one country. You know, but honestly, if it could happen, that would be fantastic, because honestly, there's nothing like having the kind of numbers, you know, that you can take behind you when you're going to negotiate at the UN, WTO, IMF, and things like that. But we're fragmented.
Well, it's a huge, huge continent. Africa
Yeah.
is a huge continent.
Yeah.
We're being joined by Makapi Selassie. Makapi, I've had to just mute you because there's lots of interference on the line. We'll come to you in a moment. But Garrett, you'd got your point you wanted to raise.
Yes, just a couple of points. Just picking up on what Marcia just said. Yeah, you know, great idea, but the fact of the matter is we've got to be realistic. You know, we've been talking about Africa United from Marcus Garvey days, and
Yeah.
you know, where are we now? However, you know, the continent is so vast, you know, east, west, north, and south. You know, we're divided tribally, but there's also religion. So we've got, you know, Christianity and we've got Muslim, and we're divided across the continent. So I think that's a difficult one. It's well worth pursuing, but it's a difficult one in reality. You know, for many years, Africa didn't have a voice. And then suddenly African Union, AU, had a voice. And, you know, many of us were still looking to the AU for really, you know, be the voice of Africa. And some of us have been disillusioned by some of the way that whole organization has functioned.
Yeah.
So there are massive issues internally. However, the point I wanted to pick up is what Simon started off about climate change. The reality is that is the biggest threat for Africans and for people globally, climate change. It's a bigger issue than reparation because it will remove people and you know, removing people from places that they've lived for thousands of years. So climate change is the massive issue that is really the one that is pressing. And you know, out of the recent climate in Egypt, they could not come to any agreement about the poorer nations and how we're going to assist those poorer nations. It's all right having, you know, these policies, but you're not giving any resources to help the poor nations. And we've seen what's happening in Madagascar at the moment. Yeah. Now people are traveling miles to get dirty water, infected, but there is no other choice of water. And, you know, that's been the case across, you know, other parts of the world. So climate change is massive. And we need to connect climate change with economics because that is where the issue lies. If we don't make those connections, we're not going to move forward.
Yeah.
And we all know, right, that the wealth of Africa and the Americas and the Commonwealth, the wealth has been sucked out of the country. And even after independence, who control the economy? You know, if you decide that you don't want to sell your product to Britain or to a European country, what happens? You get blocked by all other countries and you're not able to sell your product. Go back to Norman Manley back in the 70s when he challenged the Jamaican dollar was the highest dollar in the world. But there were issues about sugar and banana and so forth. And of course, these are the issues. You get independence from your colonial powers, and the colonial powers make it their business to punish you and block you from any other development. And just look at the example of Haiti with the French. The first independent empire challenged and defeated the French. But look what has happened since that. And you've seen what's happened. Haiti has never recovered economically for what they've done. And so they've been punished, continual punish as a result of standing up to the colonial powers. These are the real issues. And until we connect, you know, connect the conversation across the world, it's not in one place, the conversation needs to be connected globally.
Thank you. I
Right,
couldn't have put it better. Thank you.
So I think one of the points you made, Bunmi, thank you very much for that, Garrick, anyway. One of the points you made was that could the Queen possibly, because we're talking specifically about the Queen here, because I think it's different with Charles, because he has indicated that he is more knowledgeable and he went to school and he was educated in a much more open way, whereas the Queen herself was never educated in school. She only had private education. So you ask the question, you know, could she be completely oblivious of the various crimes against humanity? And you mentioned the Prime Minister's briefing. Well, that's a weekly briefing.
Okay.
So she would have been well aware of the headlines and everything else. But as I mentioned a little earlier, I've been watching the, here in Australia, I've been watching the Crown, the latest series, and that's really interesting because it's not from a British point of view. It's not filmed by a British crew, and and you can when I was thinking about these things and watching an episode, you can see, well, no. And the most recent incident, which has been reported even in our headlines over here, of the racist comments being made by one of the household to a very respected British citizen who happened to have darker coloured skin, just appalling. So I'm amazed by that. So I'm going to just suggest at the moment that, because we never know how the lines are going to go, we've also got McCarthy with us, and we've got Tolu. Tolu, did you want to comment or say anything? Perhaps not. Let's see about McCarthy. McCarthy, did you want to come in with anything?
Yeah, greetings everyone. I didn't really hear the presentation due to right now we've got a power outage once again. It's like we've had them for the past almost 2 weeks every day. So I didn't really hear the conversation. So I don't really, I don't really know what to comment on.
Yeah, well, McCarthy coming and joining us from Tanzania is a miracle anyway. So really, really well done. That's absolutely wonderful. And Simon's also put a photograph in our chat to say about his about the port of no return. Thank you, Simon, for that. Yeah, so Bunmi's responded to that. Okay, then. June Elizabeth, do you want to make a comment? And then I was just going to add a few more points, because we get a good program on here called The Stuff the British Stole. So I'm going to tell you about that in a minute.
Yes.
Okay,
I didn't know if Tulu did want to say anything. Do you want to say something, Tulu? Okay. Yeah, she's coming.
No, I'm just listening, and I'm a bit distracted at the moment. So, can I just listen, please?
Yeah, just give you the opportunity if you want. You can put your hand up if you want to say. This is the lady that she's living in Lagos.
Hi, Tolu. How is Lagos?
Hi.
How are you?
Lagos is Lagos. Good.
Okay, thank you for coming on, Tulu. Yes, well, I was going to say that what I find fascinating, I'm going back to the presenter. I just love how Bunmi presents, and I was kind of taken in when she showed what she did over the COVID period of getting to children, like in the bush especially, that have not got the education, and how she topped them up every day or every week. And I thought that, I always think about it, and I think that's so fantastic, because, you know, being born in England, Tulu was born in England, even though she lives in Lagos, but being born in England, so, and going to a school where, you know, I was the head girl of a white school, but altogether there might have been a handful of Black people in the end. And I can remember when we had history, that's what I took my O-levels in. When we had history, the only thing we ever did in history that mentioned Black people was that the word apartheid was brought up. And my teacher had the same name as me. She was Mrs. White, a lovely lady. And I asked her what apartheid was, but she didn't really explain it. I think she was too embarrassed. So that brings me on to when I did my project at school, the first book I wrote, it was about 4 medical pioneers in history, but they were white. Now, if I was taught a little bit of Black history, yes, I would have written about quite a few people that I know now, including Mary Seacole, the first Black doctor, lots of Black people that were in history that, as Bunmi said, you know, they just didn't teach us. And my concern now is, you know, who's going to teach it? We've got to teach it, who know it, right? Because if we're depending on the teachers to teach it, they've got to be taught themselves. And it's not even in the curriculum. I mean, Mr. Gove, I was in the Black vote to prevent him taking Black history out of the curriculum. The few little Black people that they had, he was taking them out when he was education secretary. So I thought that's a bit strange. So what I did, I got this book, I might have shown you it before, but I got this book, the Pan Africans, yeah? And the university, because I used to lecture at the University in Northampton on Black history. So the contents is Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, W.E.B. Dubai, Marcus Garvey, George Padmore, C.L. James, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, Haile Selassie, Paul Robeson, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, Patrice Lumumba, and Malcolm X and Nelson Mandela. So they didn't have it this. So I got a few from Jamaica and put in the University of Northampton. That was a few years ago. So just coming on now, last week I was had an interview. I've been asked I could do my MA in history and they're going to pay for it, the university. So the professor said there's an African gentleman who he's kind of brought something in called the shelf, and he's put a lot of Black books there and that encourages people. It's a reference, so you can't take it away. So he's encouraging people to, you know, come and look at the books, and also people have started to bring books in. So I said, well, I normally get my books when I go to the book launches. I get 2 copies, so I might put a couple of copies in on that shelf. So thank you very much, Bunmi, and I look forward to another time when you can tell us some of those little stories about what you did in COVID.
Thank you.
I take my hat off to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. And you can see, oh dear, I'm so sorry. That got crept up. Right. Okay. So, Bunmi, thank you so much. And what I was trying to say, June Elizabeth, is that you can see more of Bunmi's clips, well, not clips, presentations. She's got a whole bank of them now, because it's quite some time since the early days of COVID when you said you started this. So it's Sankofa Pan African series. And please remember as well that Bunmi herself is a very well respected author. Bunmi, I've got, and I can read the name of one of the books, Twisted Minds. I know you've got another one came out recently. Do you want to tell us anything about your books, Bunmi?
I don't know. I don't actually have a new book out. 3 Women has been out for a few years. I've been focusing more on writing children's stories for the Sankofabooks.com. So I've been focusing more on just populating it with stories from all over global Africa.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you. So we're going to ask you to come along again. Garrett, you've got a point you want to raise?
Sorry,
Yes.
Gareth, I just want to say before I forget, I've registered for the conference.
On Monday?
Yeah, I've done it.
Thank you. I look out for you there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I will do the same shortly.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention, Liz and Bunny, two things. You know, these conversations are wonderful for sharing and enlightening each other. But for me, I always look beyond this. I look at a much higher strategic level in terms of influence. And, you know, these conversations need to get to another level. And that at a level, I know with the children, it's good because you're educating children and they are the next generation that will come up and so forth. But we also need to educate educators. Sister June Elizabeth just said, you know, the fact of the matter is that teachers don't know these things, so they cannot teach it. So we need to educate educators, and educators will be teachers. They would be university lecturers. They come in a whole range of different, but there's also the politicians, right? And
Yeah.
for me, getting to the politician is really where I want to get to, because that's where I want to challenge the politicians and teach them about history that they know but don't want to accept. Right? So, you know, we need to look at the range of opportunity of taking this information to a higher level, right? And, you know, and that may well be, you know, educational conference, for example, when academics are present, that may be one source. It could be teachers conference, that could be another source. It could be, you know, economic development, whatever, another source. Just looking for the opportunity of getting this information to different audience. That should be the mission.
I think that you're quite right, and I'd be very happy. And in fact, I've just worked out the dates. The last session, we'll have a session next week where we've got Christine White's going to be in South Africa, doing some research there to follow up the things she's been doing. So she's going to join us hopefully from South Africa. But the following week, the 16th of December, we've got possibly somebody involved in the archive department of Durham University. I think he's offered to come along and talk with us as part of the session. But Garrick, I'd like to use that session and this first session back on the 6th of January as discussion about how to take things forward, because Bunmi has done absolutely brilliantly with what you're doing. I think we've done pretty well, but we need to do a whole lot better. And it's how do we do that, Garrick? So I take your point on very much so.
Yeah, and apparently there are other organizations like the one he mentioned. So maybe if we could find ways to, you know, collaborate with them in strategizing. Because honestly, the point he made is so we could all be talking for years and years to come and nothing's going to happen, you know, but strategizing how to actually get it more effective. Yeah, I think we.
So
I've got a good idea. I've got something. I'll send it to you, Liz. This I don't know if you've received anything. It's asking different groups what they're doing when you're at 75, and they want to kind of see what's happening around. So maybe, you know, in those discussions, I was thinking the same as Gareth, to have a conference, you know, where we invite people, and that be part of not just when you're at 75, we can work towards it. And
It's
when
certainly interesting. Sorry,
you hold
I'm
a good
coming across
party,
you.
sorry?
It was interesting that this is how this all started. Simon and I, Simon was going to speak at the conference that Learning Links International used to run every Black History Month. So
Right,
maybe we'll go back to that. Can we
yeah,
just whip
lovely.
on then? Because I think there's a brilliant ideas, June Elizabeth. Thank you so much. So thank you, Bunmi. And I was looking around to see where else there was some information, and I came across something in on the Democracy Now! Website, somebody from Cornell University, and he's talking about dismantling the Commonwealth. Do you know him, Bunmi?
I know of him. His father
Yeah.
is a famous writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Yeah. So that was a really interesting comments that he makes about dismantling the Commonwealth and real reckoning with colonial abuses, etc. But then also the following day, I think, because there was a lot written at this time, and Democracy Now! Had plenty of subscribers, and there's a whole thing you can watch, and Muta Baruka's on this particular one. These are both things that you can watch. There is so much out there to educate you on YouTube. So those are just two things I wanted to follow up then, Bunmi, on that. But also I especially wanted to, oh dear, my computer's playing up again now. You can see in the little picture on the side, the stuff the British stole.
Yeah,
We've had various, my computer's just overloaded, so I'll stop sharing. But this program called The Stuff the British Stole, it's, you know, primetime TV over here. And this week's story was actually about Canada and how in a British museum in Exeter, they had the regalia of one of the Canadian chiefs. And what was his regalia doing in that museum? So they worked. It's a story of how this was returned to the community, and it's really beautiful. So we get an awful lot of UK TV over here. A lot of,
and the program is called Stuff the British Stole.
It's called The Stuff the British Stole.
Okay, thank you.
You can listen to podcasts. I think you can manage to do that, but you and that's of previous things that they've got. Yes, just to say, Toya, yes, the recording will be shared. We've got a website, blackhistoriesconversations.com. But the Stuff the British Stole, I just think it's really good. They talked about how mosaics were stolen during the First World War and transported to Australia. The British stole them and transported them to Australia. There's some very interesting things, and it's a really, really different line. It's not about stealing the Benin bronzes. It's a really, really different line they're taking, looking at different Commonwealth, different countries that were in the British Empire, and just what the British were doing there. So yeah, it's really interesting.
I don't think Tulu came in later, so maybe she doesn't realise where you are stationed, Liz.
Well, I'm in Australia. Yeah, enough said about that. At 2 o'clock in the morning, no, 1 o'clock in the morning, enough was said. So we'll carry on next week with the interesting conversations that we have. Bunmi, again, I really have to thank you so much, because this issue is really, really important, that we look at how different people are addressing this and how we can take it forward. Garrick, your points have been so very, very valuable. Thank you. June Elizabeth, you've contributed a great deal as well. Thank you so much. Simon, it was great to hear from you as well. And Marcia, I'm so glad you're able to join us from Black Heritage Walks, Black Heritage Walks Network, and we look forward to hearing more about what you're doing. So I'm going to ask Simon at the moment to switch off the recording. Thank you very much indeed, and then we can have some more conversations. Okay, thanks, Simon.